What's up, guys? This is the It Ain't Easy podcast. I'm your host, Dom Sharanson. Let's get it. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Cool.
Yeah, good to see you.
Quick intro there. I think people understand kind of what you're about and a little bit about your background, but they don't know the younger self. So I like to start kind of like that elementary Mark. What was Mark like? What were his hobbies?
Yeah. What was I about? I mean, I grew up kind of I grew up skiing. I grew up in Montreal. Grew up skiing. We're on a ski bus every weekend. So that was pretty great. Spent most summers at the Rosemary Curling Club, which was like summertime was just a big open pool. You know, Mom would just drop us off there and we'd just swim all day or whatnot. And then like BMXing, I think like every kid, you know.
Yeah.
BMXing and eventually skateboarding and stuff like that.
Cool.
Yeah.
And through that elementary school kind of journey, going through, it sounds like you're playing multiple sports. At what point did that become like kind of competitive for you?
I guess actually soccer was skiing. I was in ski racing, so like that was actually moved up to the Laurentians, and you know, again, it was one of those things like Mom would just drop me at the ski hill every weekend, you know, and like the whole weekend would just be like either racing or hanging out. So that was, competitive, but not like, you know, like super competitive or anything like that. That was probably the first foray into it though. And then soccer, like I played a lot of soccer as a kid too, and actually moved to Nova Scotia for 3 years from Quebec, and played with like Dartmouth United out there, which was like kind of a good league.
Cool.
You know. And also I ended up speed skating out there. So I actually speed skated for 3 years, and I did that competitively, which was kind of a funny, you know, thing to end up in.
Yeah.
But it was fun, you know, short track.
Yeah, it's always interesting, like interviewing former athletes. I think I have that similar experience where, from like a educational standpoint, not that it came second, but socially, you know, we were sports first. So where other kids were kind of just in the backyards and like dicking around, getting into trouble over the weekends, you're getting shipped off all over the place for soccer and skating. And, you know, you're learning so much in terms of, you know, discipline, but also like movement skill acquisition. All that stuff is pretty cool.
Yeah, without knowing it sometimes too, right?
Yeah.
When I moved back from the Maritimes back to Quebec, just was getting into skating, and like, you know, I had all this leg strength from speed skating that like I never really clued into, but it was one of the reasons like launch ramp days, you know.
Yeah.
I had like, you know, I developed some physical capacity that I never really clued into way later, like where that came from, but it was like, yeah, just speed skating is like get your legs in good shape.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then so moving on to high school, you're still in Quebec for that?
Yeah, so the trajectory kind of went like, grew up in the North Shore of Montreal, then moved to the Laurentians, then moved to Nova Scotia, Dartmouth, and then back to the West Island. So I kind of my teenage years, like high school years, were in the West Island of Montreal.
Cool. What is that like high school environment like?
I mean, good, you know.
Yeah.
Like I had pretty good memories. For me at that point, it was just skateboarding. So
cool.
It was, you know, I'm trying to think where the flip happened, but I got into skateboarding when I was still in Dartmouth, and yeah, by the time I got back to the West Island, it was like all skateboarding all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a paper route, so I was up at like 5 a.m., did my paper route on my skateboard, then I came back, got changed, skateboarded to school, you know, skateboarded at lunch, skateboarded after school, like it was just nonstop.
Yeah, and in that space, like with soccer and like even speed skating, it's very formal when it comes to coaching and learning. With skateboarding, is that different? I would assume it's a lot more just kind of
different.
experiential. And,
Yeah. totally different. It was like the launch ramp days. You know, we built these like massive ramps, and you know, as a young kid, like Montreal's got great like, you know, public transit. We'd be like, you know, we'd wake up early on a Saturday and be at like Beaubien Park or like, you know, the Bricks in the east side of Montreal. We'd been like skating the Big O, you know, middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
It was pretty great.
Yeah, I do love that about Montreal. It's like, you know, and I think they built it because of how cold it gets in the winter.
Yeah.
But you can go to every major part of it, or mall, city, and not have to go outside.
Yeah.
And so yeah, like access to the whole city via transit, pay your fee, or hop over the thing, whatever it was as a kid, right?
Yeah.
No, that's awesome.
Yeah, and then the snowboarding thing was just like a natural, you know, like grew up skiing, then get into skateboarding. So it's like I see snowboarding, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, for sure I'm doing that, you know. And a buddy of mine right around the corner, at the time Sims snowboards were actually made in Quebec.
Yeah.
So he'd somehow got a Sims like prototype from the factory. It had like screwed on edges. It was a Sims 1500 FE, and I bought that off him, Paul Merck, I think his name is. And yeah. And that board, like, I'm gonna age myself here, but that board had 3 metal fins. You know, like, so like Quebec hard pack ice basically.
Yeah.
Like 3 fins. So it took a couple of trips to like realize like I should probably take those off.
Yeah.
And then that got a little bit better, and then yeah, just kind of went from there.
Would you say that like snowboarding was pretty popular at the time? Like,
No, I mean, there was, you know, that's how like kind of culturally it became pretty tight knit because there were so few people doing it.
Yeah.
So if you saw another snowboarder, you were like instantly like, all right, we got, you know, we're in this thing together.
yeah, it's like 1 in 20 of the mountain type thing.
Oh, like way less than that.
Yeah.
Like there might be 1 or 2 on the hill kind of thing.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and most places they'd make you take some kind of test, and you have to have a leash and all this stuff. But yeah, like I got a Murray Hill bus pass for Christmas one year, and I was like, so from the West Island, you could hop on this bus and you could go to the Laurentians, you could go to Tremblant, you could go to Jay Peak.
Okay.
You could go middle of the week, you could go like to Avila, whatever, right? So I got that thing and I just milked it. I went like every Saturday, every Sunday, every Wednesday, you know, and I was just like, get on the bus. My mom was a gem. She'd wake up at like 4:30, drive me to Fairview Mall, get on this bus, and I'd be in, like, you know, I'd wake up in Jay Peak.
Awesome.
It's surreal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard people say like when comparing skiing to snowboarding that like maybe skiing is easier to learn and more difficult to kind of master, and like snowboarding is way harder to learn but maybe easier to master. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think the new skis are definitely like pretty much. I think it's easier to learn, but they're both, the technology now is so like, I mean, there's amazing entry level snowboards that are definitely way, like, you're not going to catch your edge and all this stuff. You know, that are easier. So it just depends what you want to do.
Mm-hmm. And those like, what's kind of like the end capacity of those like entry level snowboards? You can't take them certain places.
No, I mean they're just going to be more forgiving. They're a little bit softer, and like, you know, you've probably heard of people saying like caught my edge or something, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so they just have, they're just designed in a way where it's way less probable that you're going to catch your edge. You know, they got a bit of rocker on it, and the way it's just easier, you know.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, I think both those things helped each other, you know, like skiing now, if you look at a ski, it's basically a small snowboard, you know, and it's gone kind of full circle.
Yeah.
The skiers are amazing too. Yeah.
And like you said, kind of skateboarding was that natural transition for you, where you were a skier before, you started skateboarding, you're like, well, I want to do this on the snow now, and this snowboarding is the perfect application of that.
Yeah.
Was there anything like that for skiing?
No, I think you just grow up. I mean, you know, I was on skis, I was in cross country skis in my backyard at like 4 or something. And my
Yeah.
mom would just like bundle me up, set a track, and just like put me on it, and I just go round and round in circles.
Yeah.
But you just kind of grow up, you know. In Canada, you're on skates or skis, or you know, it's kind of like a natural thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, the snowboarding thing definitely. Like when I saw that, I was like, I didn't even have to think about it. I was like, I'm doing that. And like that's for sure.
Yeah.
You know, it was cool.
Kind of on that note, like, what was that moment where you're like, I'm really good at this?
So it was a kind of a chain of events. I started obviously on the East Coast. The competitive scene there was mainly racing, and had a little bit of freestyle, which I mean there were the half pipes. If I showed you photos, you would laugh. They're just like these little kind of shallow tacos.
Yeah.
So I kind of came up in that, and I was doing pretty well. And I started really early working. Basically set up a little skate shop for this guy who was selling boats in Saint Laurent, like the kind of towards the West Island. And then he ended up buying a store in Laval called EQ, En Équilibre. And then he had then I helped him open another shop called Cheapskates. It was right near Park Jerry, which was like just all skateboards. And but eventually I helped manage their the EQ Laval, and so I was doing all the skateboarding and snowboarding stuff. And then we set up we had like a race team there, working with like this Quebec legend named Alain Ayoub, and so we set up this kind of like team and training at like a hill called Saint Denis, which is on the backside of Tremblant. And we were literally training with like ex-Polish like ski race coaches who would make us like hike the course in our hard boots and stuff like that.
Wow.
And so yeah, so the competitive scene was racing, and our team did really well. Like we were, top whatever, I can't exactly remember, but we were winning or in the top 3, most of us. And so that's kind of what, that's what was available out there as far as the scene.
Yeah.
And then I was going to Cégep at John Abbott, and I was taking like creative studies. So I was doing like video production and English related, but also doing like poli-sci and different stuff.
Yeah.
But and then every weekend I would just fuck off to Saint Denis for the entire weekend and just stay with my super hospitable family named the Isas in Saint Denis, and we'd wake up at 6 a.m., take the snowmobile to it was cool.
Yeah.
As far as like that experience for the East Coast, it was like really cool.
Sounds.
Yeah. And then we'd come down off the hill. We'd sometimes help out. His dad ran a restaurant there, so we'd like hit the dish pit and help do some dishes, get a meal, be back at the house. It was pretty crazy. And so yeah, like I did a couple semesters at John Abbott, and a couple things happened that made me think like I should just go snowboarding right now. And so that's what I did. I was like, I'm gonna go for 3 months. I'm just gonna drive to Whistler. And so it was a great experience, and I didn't even empty my locker. I just like left one day, like left all my shit in the locker, and I was like, I'm not going back there.
What time of year was this?
This was the fall.
Okay.
Yeah. This was the fall. So, well, that's when I left. I left in the fall, but yeah, I remember leaving. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go out there for 3 months. So that's what I did. I drove across Canada, got to Whistler, stayed at the Whistler Youth Hostel. By the end of our stay there, we were doing all the janitoring stuff because we had to pay the rent somehow.
Yeah.
And then I lucked out and got a job. This guy Dano Pendergrass gave me a job at the original snowboard shop at the back of Timberline Mall.
Cool.
So that was like the center of the universe.
Yeah.
Like the original snowboard shop in Calgary was like the first real snowboard shop in North America, and then the Whistler Annex was like, they kind of all wanted to be in Whistler, but they were still in Calgary. And I mean, you know, every day people from around the world would come in there, you know, it was so cool.
Yeah.
It was just this tiny store. It was probably like 12 by 25 or something like that.
Okay.
And so yeah, I got a job there, which meant that, you know, powder days you didn't even have to open. You know, it was just like a given, you know.
Yeah.
10 centimeter rule. If it's over 10 centimeters, like the store opens late.
That's cool.
Know? And so that kind of set me up, and, you know, I was able to rent, you know, basically rent a small 1-bedroom. And then the snowboard shop ran camps in the summer. So like, once I got the job there, I was like, okay, I'm gonna stay for the winter for sure. And then come the summertime, I got invited to be a coach, and like, so coaching consisted of basically like digging out the half pipe on the glacier and salting it, and then like meeting kids and getting them up the hill and whatever. And then, you know, doing some coaching also when you're up there, but you pretty much got to ride. And then that's the first summer that I got some sponsors. So then I was like, okay, maybe I'm not going back out east at all.
Right.
You know?
Is there a sense where, you know, you're coming from Quebec, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think even today, most of like the best like Canadian snowboarders are from out east. Is there a sense of like, you know, you're dealing with average snow conditions here, and you've been practicing on this forever, and then you get to a place like Whistler, and you're like, this is a walk in the park. Like,
yeah, definitely. From a racing perspective, like when I got to Whistler, like I won most of the events, and it's exactly that. It's like you're coming off ice, you know, like sheer ice, and you're going onto these courses that are like, you know, I wouldn't say they're flat, but I mean, because the East Coast is flat, but given the conditions, they feel just way more, just way easier to get an edge and stuff like that. So you're dealing more with like ruts than ice, and so it's like there's definitely an advantage there. I think, I mean, the best snowboarders are from all over the place, but there's definitely some, you know, if you have the balls to be doing stuff on like a crazy icy pipe in Quebec, and you come out west, I mean, it's gonna seem easier for you.
Absolutely.
You know.
Yep. And then like the sponsorship journey. What was that kind of like first process like for you?
Yeah, so my first real sponsor was Sims. So I was on Sims snowboards, and then apparel. I got some stuff from a small brand out of Colorado called Wave Rave. They were like an earlier brand. And so I was on Sims for about 2 years, I think. And, you know, they had like their main pro team, and at the time it was like, if you were Canadian, it was a little tougher to get rolling. You know, like most of the pros ended up being stateside. So I was with them for a little bit, and then where did I go after that? Division 23. Yeah. Okay. So they were like a small startup, more like skatey style company out of California.
Yeah.
I never riding for those guys, and got, you know, get a board and stuff like that. So that was cool.
And at the time, like, was there any representation, or was it more just kind of like them approaching you after a race type deal?
Well, by that time it was more freestyle. So like, I never got sponsors on the race side. It was all free riding, but at the time, like with Sims, it was like, you know, they wanted us go into like the World Cup halfpipe events.
Cool.
You know, so it was pretty cool. We go to like June Mountain or Bachelor or Quebec City or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
And then like in snowboarding in general, I kind of cleaved a couple of times. It was like, okay, first it was competitive, and you'd race and you freestyle, and then that cleaved, and so you had to pick one or the other. And then freestyle. And then freestyle kind of cleaved again into like, you know, half pipe, and then like free ride, and then that kind of cleaved again into like editorial versus competitive. And I went editorial, right? So like my career path slowly just went into like, you know, waking up and going to do photo shoots with friends, and you know, get tricks, you know, bag sequences and video clips and stuff like that.
Cool.
Yeah.
So and I've read a little bit about that too. It's like movies, some like kind of like films, snowboarding films, magazine covers. That's really cool stuff.
Yeah, it's a great time to get there. You know, I think I lucked out with like timing and everything like that. And then just putting, you know, it's like everyone says, the 10,000 hours. I mean, you at some point you put in the time to get pretty good at what you're doing. But the timing was definitely nice. And Whistler, I mean, was not, when I first got there, I got there in 91, and I mean, if it snowed, you'd have power for like days.
Yeah.
It's not like that now, but.
It's like you say, like timing's everything, but alignment's so key, and like you've been kind of breathing that lifestyle since you were like on the half pipe or like these slopes with your mom in the backyard, you know, so it's
totally.
It's definitely those hours.
But yeah, it was a good, really great chapter, you know, really good run. So
cool. And then just like listening to kind of like the business side of things too. It's like in Quebec, you were working at different skate shops and helping like open and run, learning so much in that space. You come to Whistler, where you're working at like this kind of very community oriented like small shop, and you guys are closing at 11 when you know you have these rules about the snow. And would you say like obviously those kind of events led to kind of the creation of your shop up there, like the Circle?
Yeah, so the Circle came about really because the original snowboard shop closed, and let me just take a sip of water.
Of course.
So yeah, the original snowboard shop eventually closed, and the only shop that was left, West Beach was open there, but it wasn't really like the scene, you know, it wasn't like, it didn't have a scene around it, and the only other shop was Showcase, which at the time was like a tennis racket store in the summertime. And you know, I know the guy who ran it forever, and he's a cool guy, but I mean the initial iteration of Showcase was like soulless, like kind of little mini like Whistler Blackcomb store at the bottom of Black, you know what I mean? It was just like nothing. And
kind of
so
the culture and stuff.
we were just looking at it going like, dude, like we can't just, you know, we can't have a tennis store be like our shit up here. Like that's not good.
Yeah.
And at the time I'd already started my distribution company. So we were importing and distributing like all kinds of skateboard and snowboard brands for Canada. So it was like, all right, we kind of already have access to some brands, like let's just open a shop. So I opened that with Kev Young and Anthony Vitale in '97, and it's still open now, so it's 25 years.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And like speaking of the distribution brand, like when did that kind of come to fruition?
So yeah, that was also like just kind of happened organically, like you said. Like I came up and had some skill sets, and you don't always realize this when you're kind of going through it, you know, like you don't realize like, oh yeah, I know that from there. It just kind of like dawns on you. But I came out from the East Coast, and having, you know, worked in the shops and seen how brands were kind of managed up through the retail process, like there was never really any curation. Like there was never, you know, like distributors would go down to the trade shows, they'd pick up brands, they'd bring them up to Canada.
Yeah.
And the second they started selling, they would just kind of open the floodgates. Like, you know, there's no like thought of like, where are we selling this and what does that mean?
Yeah.
And what does it mean long term, you know? And they just weren't even really that involved in like in the industry or the kind of community or scene or whatever. So I kind of understood that, and even when I drove across Canada, we actually had a couple of lines with us, and like we were stopping in all the stores and trying to rep them all the way to Whistler.
Yeah.
But so my first bigger apparel sponsor, I mean they were a small company, but I was kind of, I guess, higher up the totem there, was Special Blend, and they were being distributed by this small company out of Quebec. So they just called me one day and they're like, hey, like we need to find a new distributor, like who should we use up there? And I knew most of them, and
Yeah.
I knew most of them were not good. And then there was a couple of decent skateboard distributors, but they weren't really, they were never set up for like seasonal pre-book business. They were like, you know, just like they would bring it in and everyone would buy off at once kind of deal.
Yeah.
So I was just like, I'll distribute it.
Cool.
You know, and then just me and some friends were like, well, it started as a bigger concept that was going to involve a couple of skateboarders, and that didn't work out. So, I just kind of moved forward with it and got a couple partners, and, you know, we were working out of my buddy's garage in North Van, and we brought up like, we imported all the shorty stuff.
Yep.
Pre-Muska, and during Muska, we brought all that stuff up. We brought up, I'm trying to think of what the apparel brand you did was. It's pretty sick. We did like One Ball J Wax for like the Cummins brothers. We did like Blunt Magazine, Big Brother, all kinds of videos. And then Special Blend was like an anchor brand to what we were doing.
Cool.
So Special Blend started blowing up, and then they added Foursquare outerwear, and then Peter Line came over to Forum, and they started Forum, and that blew up. So slowly but surely, like we went from like, you know, a small place in North Van to a bigger place in North Van. Then I ended up moving back to Whistler, and by the end of it, I think we had like 5 warehouses in Whistler.
Wow.
It just kind of just kept tunk. And not that that's massive, like the warehouses in Whistler are not huge, so you end up having to have more of them. But it built up to something really nice, and we just kind of kept, you know, like a really honest dialogue going with all of our dealers as far as like, you know, they could really depend on us. Like if we're like, this is what it looks like distribution wise, they knew that was, you know, the real shit. Like it wasn't going to change.
Yeah.
So every time we launched something, they'd support it, and so all those brands did really, really well up here. And we had some awesome athletes too that were, you know, bringing the visibility and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. If someone wanted to replicate a scenario like that sounds like, you know, like this Shoe Dog scenario where you walk into a space, there's an opportunity, and maybe like on your end, there might be a sense of lack of preparedness or whatever, but you have the confidence and you have the know-how to just like get it done, and like the initiative. What kind of like characteristics do you think is necessary for somebody to like kind of replicate that?
Mm-hmm. It's a kind of a combination of like, you know, gumption. Like you gotta just be like, yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah.
You know? And I should like balance that by saying this is not about like blowing smoke. Like you know, you should have a real confidence that you can do it, but then like step to it and just do it. All of those things seem fancy, but at the end of the day, it's like it's logistics, it's like planning, it's communication, it's relationships, you know. And so, for example, like when we slowly built the 4-star business across Canada. We had like 5 showrooms. I didn't hire a single rep with any sales rep experience. I hired all snowboarders, like good people.
Yeah.
Who were like, A, good people, B, respected in the community, right? And we already had good products, so then they're more like, you know, just like kind of curating that brand experience in each territory.
Yeah.
Right? They're not like heavy sales guys. And almost all of them over the course of the next 10 years won like rep of the year here or there or whatever. And they did that all themselves, right? Like that was them bringing what they had to offer to the table kind of deal.
Cool.
So starting out, it's like a, you know, gumption, and then you have to execute, right? You got to plan and execute and just be prepared for things to go in different directions, you know.
Awesome. And then leading to like strike movement. When you know you're on the snowboard for a lot of your like athletic career, and then obviously, you know, there's an aspect. Actually, like maybe we'll go that direction in terms of like the training and the day-to-day when it comes to pro competition. how did you have to prepare, and like what kinds of things outside of like being on the snow do you have to do to kind of prepare for that?
Yeah, so, you know, the training involved in snowboarding at the time,
Yeah.
like we would basically train to rehab something, right?
Yeah.
You blow your shoulder, and, you know, you start getting it fixed, and then you follow the instructions on how to get your shoulder better. Like, we weren't hitting the gym enough.
Yeah.
You know, that's for sure.
And I think that's a lot of sports, right? Like even hockey, it's like.
And it's matured so much now, and I really wish I'd known that and understood that. And even some of those seasons, like I remember, like I had rotator cuff issues, and this shoulder was like, you know, slumped down like almost an inch, and so I'd gone into like C-bot surgery, and the guy's like, no, just, you know, go in here, strengthen all of this stuff. So that was the first time I was like, okay, I'm gonna go to the gym. You know, I'm gonna go every other day, and I'm gonna do this, and then I'm gonna do. I actually got into yoga like right around that same time, like super early. But then what happened was like I built like all of this upper body mass, and I get back on the hill, and like my mechanics are totally different.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the way I'm moving, I like my center of weight is like changed. You know, so I hadn't even like thought about that or prepared for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, the sport's just matured so much. I mean, people are training for everything, and I wish, you know, it's something I'd say to like an up and coming shredder is, you know, figure out how to maintain your equipment.
Yeah.
You know.
Which is you, yeah.
Yeah, which is super important. So yeah, forgot what the question was, but I think.
Yeah, like I think that answers it. It's like, you know, back in the day there wasn't such an emphasis on it, and I think now at the highest level everybody's kind of keen on it. So it's maintaining your mobility, things like yoga and off-season training and
Diet, huge.
Yeah. Yeah. So with stride movement, it started with like footwear. Where did you kind of decide there was like a need for like that kind of athletic brand of shoe?
Yeah, so after I moved to the city, I'd love to surf more. You know, like I'm semi-addicted to surfing, which is a frustrating thing when you're
Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the island's great. It's cold. But yeah, I was big into surfing, and then I was also like dealing with, you know, 20 odd years of standing sideways and like pushing a skateboard, you know, just asymmetry, right? So I had a ton of asymmetry, and I was super quad dominant. And it was like, you know, creating problems with like my back and just like different things, you know?
Yeah.
So I was like, all right, I need to get in shape to just like maintain and then also try and fix like some of those imbalances. Cause yeah, if you think about it on a snowboard, you know, like for me anyways, like pretty much you're on the ball of your feet.
Yeah.
You know, for whatever it is, 6-7 hours a day. So yeah, super quad dominant and asymmetric. Like if you were to look at my back, that whole right side of my back is like, has almost half an inch more muscle than the left side of my back.
Wow. Yeah.
And it's just like, just the way you stand and like the way, you know, your body is like, so that's why I started training. And I was really like so the gym I started going to, one of the guys left and they started this new thing called CrossFit. And so I dropped in there and checked it out, and it was super early days. And, you know, when people think CrossFit now, they picture like, you know, there's an accompanying kind of aesthetic to it and like kind of a narrative around it. But I mean, the original CrossFit was like pretty cool, man. And like all these guys in Northern California training in like cut off Dickies and Chucks, and you know, it was cool. And then from a training perspective, it was amazing. It's just like, you know, I couldn't believe like 2 to 3 to 4 days a week, and you start really just like being like, shit, wow, okay, I can do it. Like, you know, like being aware of your own capacity and your capacity just getting better and better and better.
Yeah.
And I remember like I was into road biking for a little bit, and I got back on my road bike after like not being on my bike for like 6 or 8 months, and took it up Cypress. I'd usually climb Cypress like a couple times a summer, and I was just like I beat my time up there by like 30%.
Wow.
I was like, how is that possible? I haven't even been on my bike, you know? But just like the way I was just so much stronger and using my body in a way more connected way. And then same thing with surfing. Like I wanted to be in shape for surfing because I'd go on vacations and maybe carve out 10 days, you know? And so if you're not in the water, you're like, the first few days, you're just getting your arms back on and you feel like you're just getting into it and you got to go home. You know, so I was like, I want to like get in the water and just be like in really good shape. And, you know, there's a lot of like, Kelly Slater's, one of his secret weapons is like the guy has an amazing workout regimen and you know, took it real serious. And like if there was no swell, he was doing this kind of training.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I go to Hawaii and I'm just like blown away. I'm like, I could stay in the water for like 4 hours, you know, like you'd still paddle to the point of like exhaustion, but then you'd recover like in, you know, I could just not paddle for 10 seconds and then go again, you know, and it's so, and just catch way more waves and just, so I was like sold. And then on top of what they taught you in CrossFit was how to run properly, you know, like, so they teach you pose running. This athlete, Brian McKenzie, who we worked with at the beginning of Stripe, he brought it into the community, and he was like a distance runner guy, you know, like 100-miler kind of dude.
Yeah. Jeez.
But he had flipped the script on training for distance by doing less mileage and more weightlifting. So he was just like deadlift, squat, you know, like get strong, don't do as much mileage, and then when you go hit your endurance race, it's like you're gonna do it on your capacity, not, you know.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting, but for me, like anytime I tried to run in the past, I would always end up just like my lower back, like my knees would hurt, my lower back would hurt, and I'd be like, all right, running just isn't for me, right? But what was happening is I'd go to the store, I'd buy a runner, you know, with some big ass heel on it.
Yeah.
It would kind of force me into a heel strike, and then I'd be kind of aggressively running or heel striking, and just like, it just like impacting my body.
Anything over 6 minutes, you're gonna feel it.
Yeah. So all of a sudden, I'm introduced to like this new running form. It doesn't hurt my body, and in conjunction with like that style of training, I was just like, part of that training, we were introduced to like pose running, and Brian, this athlete Brian McKenzie, who we'd actually worked with Stride kind of early on, had brought that to the CrossFit community, and so all of a sudden you're learning how to run, like using your body as like the suspension, you know, using your ankle, using your legs, like it just was kind of a game changer. So all of a sudden I could run again.
Yeah. And
then combined with that just ongoing like physical fitness, it's just feeling great, you know. And some of the back issues seemed to be like getting solved, you know. Like seems like I'd build strength to a certain point, something would like kind of break down or go out, and then once I'd fix that and move on, that problem would be like resolved.
Yeah.
You know, through that style of running, specifically, you're introduced to like minimalist footwear. And so minimalist footwear at the time was kind of picking up, you know? Okay. And so I understood what I wanted out of a shoe, and it wasn't really available. There was a couple players in the market. I mean, I wasn't about to wear like a Vibram 5-finger shoe,
right?
And plus, like, they're too thin. There was right after we started developing, there was New Balance came up with the Minimus series, and that was pretty good too. Actually, some guys from Pemberton did like the trail shoe for them, and then there was a couple other brands who either had a really narrow last, so like that wasn't really, you know, it was hitting the mark on like the thickness but not the width. So I ended up in a shoe that had a low drop, like heel to forefoot drop, but pretty big stack height. It was like a New Balance RT801 or something. And so I'm sitting there, I'm trying to find shoes that are gonna like tick the boxes. And I'm, in the sports store looking at like 800 pairs of shoes or whatever.
Yeah.
And none of them are kind of doing it. And then on top of that, like they all have this like fishing lure look to them.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay, maybe there's, room for something there. So I started thinking about it, and in my trajectory through, my work life, I'd done pretty much most things outside of like specifically product development, but where I had been involved in product development as an athlete was like my whole snowboard career, because all the athletes are doing product development, right?
Yeah.
So like whether it's board shape, boot design, bindings, gloves, apparel, we were doing intrinsic design every day.
Yeah.
Like the zipper's too short, or this needs to be like this. We were constantly giving that feedback to the companies that we worked with. So it turns out I had done a lot of kind of design feedback.
Yeah.
And then having worked on like the sales and marketing end, I kind of understood feedback loops there too, like how that works. If you bring something and then there's feedback from the retailers or whatever, and you bring it back to product.
Awesome.
So, so I wasn't like deterred by, I think, the eventual complexity that goes into starting a footwear brand. Like it's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah.
It's, but I wasn't initially deterred by that. And so I found an outfit online that was doing, kind of helping to manage design and production stuff. And I started working with a contractor, and we designed some outsoles, and then we opened a test mold and tested it, and we went from there.
Cool.
Yeah, that was we're 10 years old
Congratulations.
this year. Yeah,
That's
so
exciting.
decade, kind of crazy.
Yeah. In that sort of journey, starting a company from scratch, like what are kind of the biggest obstacles that you think everybody faces?
The unknown.
Yeah.
Like things that you're not, you might not know to prepare for. The best laid plans make way for the nature of events. You can plan all you want, but it's like you might not be able to see that is going to happen or that's going to happen.
Yeah.
So you just gotta be like tenacious and like plug away. And as a founder, you just have to be all in. Like you just gotta keep going.
Yeah.
So that was, for us, our in our set of growing pains was like product interruption. There was a couple of different things, but like first we set off to be more of a wholesale brand, and to be honest, we were probably a little early, which isn't necessarily a good thing.
Yeah.
But like at the beginning, like the word athleisure hadn't really even been coined, and in some ways we were kind of bringing that aesthetic to footwear.
Yeah.
And so like we did a couple of trade shows, and like we had some amazing responses. We got like a Japanese distributor, we got like all of this activity, but we weren't really selling into stores in like the States or Canada yet. Gotcha. Right at the beginning. Yeah. The first couple of years. Meanwhile, like e-commerce was just taking off for us. Like we were seeing some success there. Anytime we did events, people were like really receptive to the product. Mm-hmm. So we looked at it and we're like, okay, well, it seems like the barrier to our end consumers in this model is actually the retailers, because we can't get into the retailers to be in front of the end consumers. So we'll just go more direct, right? Yeah. And at the time we'd signed like a global license agreement, so we kind of pulled out of that and opened the Gastown shop and became more direct and went to more events, and we grew like over 250% that year.
Cool.
And then we had to change factories and didn't have new product for 19 months.
Oh wow.
So it was just like, all rockets, full blast.
That's kind of that unknown you're speaking
Yeah,
of,
it's just,
right?
it's unknown, and at the time you don't necessarily realize it. Like the first months you still have some inventory to sell, but then you're coming back on a year and it's like, well, you're not going to go back to the same events you went to last year with the same same product.
Right.
So it kind of like real stick in the spokes, and you might not see what the impact is for a year or 2 years
Mm-hmm.
on what's happening right now. So you got to just keep going, and that's kind of what we did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you look at the stores and kind of like the visual merch, you speak of like the minimalist design of the shoe, and I kind of feel that in the vibe of the store too. It's so community oriented, and the product it's obviously there and you can see it, but you can also see through it and you can see kind of like the whole store.
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of like intentional, and is the same kind of minimalist design applying to like the apparel as well?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I'm glad you could see that. I mean, I think that there's our underlying theme, when we set out on the footwear was like, okay, we're going to make footwear that's like true to specific design principles, like that works.
Yeah.
And we're going to do away with any false technologies, right?
Okay.
Like when you start understanding minimalist footwear and principles, you realize that like, shocks, springs, this,
Right.
that, it's just gimmicks, right?
Yeah.
And the industry as a whole has learned how to sell footwear off gimmicks and like some feature, so they're always chasing this feature, like this season's whatever.
Yeah.
Most of it's garbage, right? So when you kind of free yourself of that, you're like, okay, I can simplify this and
Mm-hmm.
keep simplifying. And in design, I think it's always a good kind of practice. And then same thing with apparel. Like we wanted the brand to be, the reason we wanted to have apparel is we wanted it to be like an athletics brand.
Yeah.
And if you spend too long just doing footwear, you're kind of a footwear brand, it's harder to kind of tell the other story.
Yeah.
That's my thinking anyways. And that's the same thing with the apparel. We try to just make it, like the cuts are really nice, the fabrics are really nice, we spec all the fabrics ourselves, we're not like an off-the-shelf company and go to all the materials shows. So we maintain a real hand in that. And we actually did all of our production domestically for as long as we could, for over 8 years here in Canada, which is really hands-on, but it makes you kind of really, it keeps you really involved in the process and the design and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've had a pair of key shorts, but they're like,
Yep.
they're awesome.
That's
You just like live in them all summer.
You
like
do everything.
Run, swim, like
Yep.
you name it, right? So that's what we're trying to do, and the industry is in a place right now where there's just a lot out there, and that cleaner kind of athleisure aesthetic has definitely caught up and become like a pretty mainstream thing. So we're always looking for like, okay, well, what's relevant now? What from a design perspective, like how are we going to stay true to what we're doing, but also bring something a little different or some newness. To your point about the store, when we had that opportunity to kind of redefine the brand, we wanted to show people what it could look like, like in one place.
Yeah.
And then the idea behind the space was always to just be like a center for the brand in Vancouver, which is why we had Vancouver's first paleo cafe in there, and it was like, the idea was just come in and hang out, even if you're not going to buy anything. That's cool.
Yeah.
And if anything, like I wish we had been more successful at just being able to spend the time on that community stuff. But you just get pulled into different parts of the business. And
Absolutely.
yeah.
And over time, like you said, this is a 10-year anniversary. You guys have a long way to go, and I wish the best for like all the future success.
Thank you, Dom. Yeah, thanks, man.
Can you do a little bit of a closing kind of thing for us? Like, I have a couple questions that I ask everybody. The first being, some people find this a little weird, but it's like if I'm at your house, what would I find in there that you wouldn't find at other people's?
I don't know. You find a bunch of art, and there's definitely art in different people's songs, but you'd find a ton of instruments.
Okay.
Yeah, like I play bass and guitar and piano and
Wow.
different stuff. I'm not very good at any of it, but I try and play it all.
Explore.
And
Awesome.
so you'd find that. What else? Yeah, I mean, it's pretty pared down, just like most of, from an aesthetic perspective. It's kind of modernist and pared down.
Cool.
Yeah.
The next one is if you were to live inside any movie, what would it be, or which one would it be, and why?
Shit. I don't know, man. That's a tough one.
It's tough. So many options.
Yeah. One of my favorite movies was Dune, so watching the remake has been cool.
Mm. See, I haven't seen the original. I've heard good.
Yeah, I mean, people bag on the David Lynch version, but it's pretty good.
Yeah.
It's pretty good. You gotta kind of watch it through the lens of like theater, not movie, because of the special effects and different stuff.
Right.
I actually just read the book, which I had never actually read the book before, so that was kind of cool. It fills in some pieces. But I wouldn't want to live on Arrakis, so.
Right. All the
so I don't know, man.
Snakes running
yeah.
around.
Yeah. I don't know. It's a tough. I'm gonna have to think about that.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I'll check in on you in a couple of weeks, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just in closing, like, if you had a message to kind of like your younger self, like, what would it be?
Just like, maybe like take your time a little bit, like when I remember being semi-depressed turning 20, because I was like, man, I'm not a teenager, I'm getting old, like I was 20.
Yeah.
And it's just like, you don't even, your brain's not even finished developing to 25. Like, give yourself time, don't be in too big a rush. Let yourself, like for me in particular, like I never saw, for some reason, I never set my goal in snowboarding was literally like, I'd be stoked if I could pay rent, right? And then it was something else, but it was never like, I never saw it as like a long-term thing.
Yeah.
And that was probably a mistake, because I probably could have just milked it and like been snowboarding for an extra, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But, and maybe that's just being like my generation and having a bit of entrepreneurship, but like I was always doing something on the side, like building something on the side, and you need the time to like invest into whatever it is you want to be doing, and kind of give yourself the opportunity to do that, and I have this guy we work with out of Venice, California, Logan Gelbrick. He's got a pretty cool book, but he talks about that. He's like, if you really dedicate yourself to anything in particular, and you like really dedicate yourself, even if that doesn't pan out, you can take those skills are transferable.
Yeah.
Right? So like like for you, your dedication to football and like the way you understand how to train for what you want to get out of it, and like you're gonna take that, you're already doing it, and you're gonna bring that to other aspects of your life, right?
Absolutely.
So that would be the advice. It's just, pursue something you are really passionate about.
Yeah.
Give yourself the ability to just focus on that. Like, don't worry about it too much. Like, take your time, knowing that, as if you give it your all, you'll be able to pull that skill set over somewhere else. And there's always something else. There's always another door there.
Yeah.
So.
No, it's awesome. There's so much inspiration in this like hour kind of segment here. So thank you so much for coming on. So many bars, and I hope to stay in touch. All the best wishes for Strike and Aspect. And
thanks, Tom.
yeah, and to your
Thanks
family
for
as
having me.
well.
Yeah.